The night air in Kosovo tasted of diesel smoke and imminent violence. December 1999. The world was hours away from a new millennium. But in this corner of the Balkans, time had stopped, somewhere in the darkest chapter of human nature. Sarah Merrick pressed her body against the concrete wall of the Serbian command bunker, her breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. 21 years old, 3 years out of training. Her heart beat steady and slow the way Thomas Halstead had taught her. Fear was information. Panic was death. The bunker entrance loomed before her, a steel door painted in flaking Soviet green. Behind it, the command center that coordinated ethnic cleansing operations across 3 provinces. Intelligence said they were destroying evidence tonight, burning files, erasing hard drives, preparing to scatter like cockroaches when NATO forces arrived at dawn. She couldn't let that happen. Her earpiece crackled. Halstead's voice, calm and measured, speaking from a surveillance post 3 kilometers away. Reaper, you have a 60-second window. Guard rotation just past your position. Next check-in is 01:15 hours. Copy, she whispered. Her voice barely moved the air. She pulled a small device from her vest pocket. Cold War Soviet bypass key modified with modern microprocessors. Halstead had taught her the theory. She had perfected the execution. The lock mechanism was old mechanical, designed by engineers who believed in steel and springs, not algorithms and access codes. The key slid home. 3 seconds of manipulation, a soft click that sounded like thunder in her heightened state. The door opened. Inside the bunker was a maze of concrete corridors lit by flickering fluorescent tubes. The smell hit her immediately. Cigarette smoke, unwashed bodies, and something else. Fear. The kind that soaked into walls when terrible orders were given and followed. She moved like water through shadows. Each step placed with absolute precision. Each breath controlled. She had studied the building plans for 2 weeks, memorized every corridor, every door, every potential escape route. Her mind held the entire structure like a 3-dimensional map. The command center was on the 2nd sub-level. She could hear voices now speaking Serbian, laughing at something. The casual banality of evil. Men who would order atrocities and then go home to kiss their children goodnight. The server room was unguarded. They never expected infiltration this deep. Why would they? NATO was still days away. The Americans were content to bomb from 30,000 feet. No one was crazy enough to walk into the dragon's mouth. No one except Reaper. The servers hummed with Soviet-era redundancy, massive machines that generated enough heat to turn the small room into a sauna. She connected her data tap fingers, flying across the interface, not just copying files. That would take too long. She was planting something deeper, a worm that would propagate through their entire network, ensuring every byte of data was captured and transmitted before they could destroy it. Reaper, you have contacts approaching. 2 men armed 40 meters from your position. Halstead's voice was still calm. He had been a Marine sergeant before the Navy recruited him for classified work. He had seen worse situations. Hell, he had survived worse situations. That steadiness flowed through the radio like a transfusion of courage. Sarah's hands never stopped moving. The upload progress bar crawled across her screen. 70%, 80%. Footsteps in the corridor. Getting closer, male voices speaking casually. One of them laughed. 95%. The door handle turned. 100%. She disconnected the tap, slipped it into her vest, and melted into the shadow behind the server rack. The door opened. 2 guards entered, cigarettes dangling from their lips. They walked to the environmental controls, adjusted. Something never looked behind the equipment. They left. The door closed. Sarah exhaled for the first time in 90 seconds. Reaper packages uploaded, exfil in 3 minutes. North Corridor emergency exit. Go now. She moved, not running. Running made noise. She flowed through the corridors like a ghost, retracing her path with perfect recall. Up the stairs, through the main level. The steel door appeared before her. Behind her, an alarm began to wail. They had discovered something. Maybe the data tap left a trace. Maybe a guard noticed something out of place. It didn't matter. She had 3 minutes to clear the kill zone before the entire compound lit up like a prison yard. She burst through the door into the frozen night. The extraction point was 800 meters north through an abandoned industrial zone. She ran now, full sprint, boots pounding frozen ground. Behind her, searchlights blazed to life. Shouts in Serbian. the metallic chunk of rifles being charged. Reaper contacts on your 6, 4 men armed 200 meters in closing. She didn't respond, needed her breath for running. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but her mind was clear. Halstead had trained her for this. Push past the pain, push past the fear. The body could do impossible things if the mind refused to quit. Gunfire erupted. Bullets snapped past her head, that distinctive crack of supersonic rounds missing by inches. She zigzagged using rubble and burned-out vehicles for cover. Ahead, the extraction point, a drainage culvert that led to the river. More gunfire. Closer now, a round sparked off metal near her head. She dove, rolled, came up running. 50 meters, 30 meters. A voice shouted behind her. Not Serbian, Russian, an officer probably coordinating the search. The Russians had advisors here. Everyone knew it, even if Moscow denied it. She reached the culvert and disappeared into its concrete mouth. The darkness swallowed her. She ran blind now, hands trailing the walls, feet splashing through ice-cold water. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit echoed and then faded. The culvert opened onto the river. A small, inflatable boat waited hidden in the reeds. She climbed in, started the electric motor, and slipped away into the current. The compound's searchlights swept the area, but she was already gone. A ghost, a shadow, a legend that would be whispered about in intelligence circles for decades. Reaper confirm extraction. Confirmed, she breathed. Package delivered. Mission complete. Through her earpiece, she heard Halstead exhale. Outstanding work. Welcome to the history books, kid. That data just prevented a massacre. Sarah Merrick didn't respond. She was already thinking about the next mission, the next impossible task. The next time they would need someone to walk into hell and come back carrying fire. She was 21 years old. She was invincible. She was Reaper, and the world had no idea she existed. 26 years later, Sarah Merrick stood in the cavernous hangar bay of the USS Dauntless and felt the weight of those memories like stones in her pockets. 47 now. The invincibility had faded somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan or the backstreets of Damascus. The knees that had carried her through Kosovo now creaked in cold weather. The reflexes were still there, buried under scar tissue and accumulated wisdom, but they didn't fire with the same unconscious speed. She had gone into logistics because it was supposed to be quiet, a place where old ghosts could rest, where the skills could rust in peace. The Navy had been happy to classify her record and file her away in the quiet machinery of supply chains and system maintenance. Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Merrick, Logistics Specialist. Invisible again, but this time by choice. Except nothing was ever that simple. The hangar base swarmed with activity. Operation Neptune Spear, the largest naval war game in a generation. 5 carrier groups, 73 ships, 40,000 sailors. A demonstration of American naval power designed to remind the world that the Pacific Ocean had an owner. Sarah navigated the chaos with the efficiency of long practice. No one gave her a second look. A middle-aged woman in utility fatigues carrying a heavy Pelican case of diagnostic equipment. The Master Chief insignia on her collar marked her as senior enlisted, but in the world of admirals and captains, she was functionally invisible. A technician, a wrench turner, someone who fixed things when they broke and then disappeared back into the shadows. She preferred it that way. The Combat Information Center was on the 3rd deck, buried in the ship's guts, where the real work happened. The CIC was the brain of the vessel, a darkened room filled with radar screens and tactical displays, where young officers tracked the movements of fleets and tried to look confident about their decisions. Lieutenant Kimberly Ashford stood at the central command console, her knuckles white on its edge. 28 years old, academy graduate, first major deployment as a department head. Her face was tight with stress, jaw-clenched eyes locked on a holographic display that showed a dozen friendly ship icons blinking angry red. Master Chief Merrick, Ashford's voice was sharp, professional, barely containing frustration. Here, Lieutenant. Ashford turned her eyes sweeping over Sarah's plain uniform and the heavy case. A flicker of disappointment crossed her face. She had been expecting a team of civilian engineers from Fleet Cyber Command. Instead, she got one middle-aged Master Chief who looked more like a senior supply clerk than a systems specialist. You're the specialist they sent for the Aegis sink failure. I am. Ashford gestured at the tactical display where Battle Group Delta's ships blinked in error. The entire fire control network is disconnected across 12 vessels. The new software won't interface with the legacy guidance systems. We've run every diagnostic in the manual. It's a ghost in the machine. Sarah set her case down with a solid thud that somehow commanded attention. Usually a firmware conflict. The patch notes for the upgrade mentioned a potential handshake issue with older SPY-1D radar arrays. Did you try a cold reboot of the primary server node? Ashford blinked, taken aback by the immediate specific diagnosis. The protocol for cold reboot requires fleet-wide authorization from Admiral Blackwood himself. He considers it an admission of failure. Understood. Sarah's voice carried no judgment, no editorial comment. She simply absorbed the information. The problem wasn't just technical, it was political. It was about an admiral's ego. Let me see the logs. For the next hour, Sarah worked in silence. She connected a custom data tap to the main console, her fingers moving across a holographic interface projected from her own device. The younger techs in the CIC watched her with growing curiosity than grudging respect. She moved with absolute economy of motion, her focus so intense it seemed to pull sound from the air around her. Petty Officer Garrett Thorne, a cocky young cybernetics specialist with 3 years in the Navy and a master's degree from MIT, leaned close to Ashford. Who is she? Her service record just says logistics and ordnance specialist, but she's digging deeper into the core code than our own systems administrator is allowed to access. Ashford shook her head, eyes fixed on Sarah's work. I have no idea. But she was requested by name from Fleet Command, by someone above the Admiral. That information hung in the air like a question mark. Sarah paid them no attention. She had found the problem. It was exactly what she suspected, a subtle, deeply embedded flaw in the firmware security protocols. The new system was treating the older, reliable hardware as a foreign threat, actively rejecting its data. It was sophisticated, elegant, and incredibly stupid. But as she traced the code's logic, something made her pause, something familiar in the pattern. The way the authentication handshake was structured, the specific method of rejection. She had seen this before, years ago, in different code, different systems. She pulled up a comparison algorithm from her personal device, running it against archived patterns she kept for precisely this reason. The match came back 97%. Russian GRU Cyber Warfare Division. Signature coding style. This wasn't a bug. This was deliberate sabotage. Sarah's face remained neutral, but her mind raced. Someone had compromised the firmware update, planted a backdoor designed to trigger during major fleet operations, create catastrophic failure, undermine confidence in American naval technology, classic Cold War tactics updated for the digital age. She couldn't report it now, not without proof, not without understanding the full scope. If she alerted them, the adversary would know they had been detected and would cover their tracks. She needed to plant monitoring subroutines. Watch, wait, gather evidence. She continued working, but now with dual purpose, fixing the immediate problem while simultaneously setting traps for whoever had created it. Her fingers flew across the interface, writing code that looked like diagnostic routines, but actually functioned as silent watchers, recording every system interaction, building a complete forensic picture. Master Chief, Thorne had moved closer, watching her work. That's not standard protocol. What are you doing, implementing a redundant authentication layer? Sarah said, without looking up. The security protocols are too aggressive. I'm teaching the system to recognize friendly assets. It was technically true. It just wasn't the complete truth. Thorne studied the code scrolling across her screen. That's brilliant. Where did you learn that technique? Experience. Sarah's voice carried a finality that discouraged further questions. Across the CIC, near the rear access corridor, a figure watched from the shadows. Senior Chief Thomas Ironside Halstead, 64 years old, 43 years in the Navy, with ribbons on his chest that told the story of Desert Storm, Kosovo, Afghanistan, and a dozen classified operations that would never appear on any official record. Halstead watched Sarah work and felt something stir in his chest. Recognition, memory, the way she moved, the way she positioned herself with unconscious tactical awareness, always knowing the location of exits and potential threats. the way her fingers flew across the interface with a speed that came from muscle memory, not recent training. He had trained dozens of specialists over his career, taught them tradecraft, taught them survival, taught them how to think like the enemy. But there had been only one who had absorbed everything he taught and then transcended it, who had become something he could never be. He had heard she had retired from fieldwork, gone into logistics, disappeared into the quiet machinery of the Navy's support systems. He had been relieved. The field had a way of killing its best operators. Better to rest, better to let the legend fade. Except legends had a way of being needed again. A young sailor passed Halstead in the corridor. "Chief, the Admiral wants all senior staff on deck for the fleet-wide address. 10 minutes. Halstead nodded but didn't move. He kept watching Sarah work, and in his mind he saw a different time, a different place. Kosovo, December 1999. His Marine convoy pinned down by mortar fire. The night his luck ran out. Except it hadn't. Someone had intervened. Someone had disabled the Serbian targeting radar from the inside. They found the facility the next day, the equipment sabotaged with a precision that spoke of expert training. And near the server room they had found a small device, a modified Soviet bypass key. Halstead had recognized it. He had taught that modification technique to exactly 3 students in his career. 2 had died in Afghanistan. The third had been a young woman with gray eyes and an unnerving ability to think 3 moves ahead of everyone else. A woman they called Reaper because she moved through enemy territory like death itself, silent and inevitable. He had never confirmed it was her. She had never acknowledged it. But he knew. And now, watching her work 26 years later, he knew she still carried those skills. Still moved with that deadly precision. Still thought like a ghost. The question was why Fleet Command had pulled her back into the light. On the ship's main speakers, a voice crackled through the announcement system. "All hands prepare for fleet-wide address from Admiral Blackwood. Hangar Bay 1, 0800 hours sharp. All personnel not on essential watch to attend." Sarah's hands paused on her interface. She looked up at the chronometer. 20 minutes until the address. The system patch she was writing needed at least 2 hours to compile and test. Rushing it would risk crashing the entire network. Ashford's face went pale. "That's in 20 minutes. The Admiral wants a status report. He expects this fixed." "It won't be fixed in 20 minutes, Sarah stated calmly. "The patch needs to be compiled, tested in a sandbox environment, and then deployed sequentially across all affected systems. Rushing it will crash the entire grid." "You don't understand." Ashford's voice dropped to a desperate whisper. "Fleet Admiral Blackwood doesn't accept it won't be fixed. He's from the old guard. He thinks anything digital is a weakness. He'll end my career for this." Sarah finally looked up, her gray eyes meeting Ashford's. There was no sympathy in them, only a clear, unwavering assessment of reality. "The system doesn't care about his opinion, Lieutenant, or your career. It only cares about the code. Tell the Admiral the specialist is working on a solution. Give him no timeline." With that, she turned back to her console, her focus absolute. She was a mechanic tuning a delicate engine, and the noise of the outside world was fading to nothing. She was in her element, but she was about to be dragged out of it. The hangar bay was packed with humanity. 1,000 faces turned toward the raised platform at the far end, where Admiral James Blackwood stood like a monument to a different era of warfare. 62 years old, 6 feet 3 inches of coiled authority, with a chest full of ribbons that read like a history of American military intervention. Desert Storm, Somalia, Bosnia, Afghanistan, Iraq. His face was carved granite, his eyes were blue ice, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "They tell me," he began, pacing the stage, his voice amplified by the ship's speakers until it seemed to come from the steel itself, "that our new systems are better, faster, smarter." He paused, letting the words hang. "I tell you they are fragile. They are a glass jaw waiting for a fist." The crowd shifted. Some nodded. Others looked uncertain. The younger sailors had grown up with computers. The older ones remembered a different Navy. "In my day," Blackwood continued, his voice rising, "we navigated by the stars. We aimed our guns with our eyes. We didn't hide behind lines of code written by children who have never tasted salt spray." His eyes swept the crowd, landing on Lieutenant Ashford, who stood at rigid attention near the front. Lieutenant Ashford, report. Is your Phantom network fixed, or is my battle group still flying blind because a computer decided to have a tantrum? The collective gaze of 1,000 sailors shifted to Ashford. Sarah watched from the back of the hangar, her diagnostic case at her feet. She had positioned herself near the exit, old habits dying hard. Always know where the doors are. Always have an escape route. Ashford's voice barely made it through her comm microphone. Sir, the specialist is working on a complex firmware issue. She advises that a solution is being implemented. Advises? Blackwood's laugh was harsh, grating. A specialist advises me on my own flagship. Where is this so-called specialist? Get her up here. A path cleared through the crowd like magic. Two master-at-arms appeared beside Sarah, their faces professionally neutral. She showed no reaction, simply picked up her case and walked toward the stage, her pace calm and deliberate. Each step measured, each breath controlled. Her composure seemed to infuriate the Admiral more. She ascended the steps and stood before him. The vast crowd watched in silence. She was a foot shorter than Blackwood, standing in his shadow, but somehow the space between them crackled with tension. She was a study in quiet composure against his towering rage. Master Chief Petty Officer Merrick. Blackwood read from her name tag, his voice dripping with disdain. A logistics specialist. They sent me a glorified wrench turner to fix a billion-dollar combat system. Sarah's voice was even clear, carrying across the silent hangar without amplification. The problem isn't mechanical, Admiral. It's a logic error in the security firmware. The system is protecting itself so aggressively that it has severed communication with its own components. Blackwood's face darkened. He was a man who understood broadsides and flanking maneuvers, not firmware. Her technical explanation felt like defiance, like she was deliberately confusing him with jargon to undermine his authority. I don't want excuses, Master Chief. I want my ships ready to fight. Can you fix it, or are you just another piece of dead weight my Navy is forced to carry? I can fix it, Sarah said, but it will take time. It must be done correctly. Time is a luxury I don't have. Blackwood stepped closer, invading her space, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. I give the orders here. I say when and how things get fixed. Your job is to say yes, sir, and do it. Do you understand me? Sarah held his gaze. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. I understand the order, Admiral, but the system will not. It was the final straw. Her calm refusal to be intimidated was the ultimate insult. In front of his entire command, this logistics technician was contradicting him. His discipline, forged in the crucible of absolute authority, snapped like a dry stick. Rage flashed in his eyes, pure, primal, uncontrolled. Get off my stage. His hand came up, not a shove. A backhand strike meant to dismiss, to humiliate. Fast and brutal and utterly unexpected by everyone except the woman it was aimed at. The crowd gasped as one, but the blow never landed. Sarah moved. It wasn't conscious thought, it was a circuit buried deep in her brain, forged by 1,000 hours of training with Thomas Halstead. Trained into muscle and nerve until it became reflex, faster than thought, more certain than intention. Her left hand shot up, not to block but to parry. She deflected Blackwood's wrist inward, redirecting his momentum. Her right hand followed in the same fluid motion, a rigid blade striking the radial nerve cluster on his forearm. His arm went numb instantly, his fingers uncurled in shock. She pivoted. Her body flowed around his, using his forward momentum against him. Her hand slid from wrist to elbow, locking the joint with anatomical precision. Her shoulder pressed into his back, driving him off balance. She dropped her weight. Physics and leverage did the rest. Fleet Admiral James Blackwood, commander of 40,000 sailors, stumbled forward. A precisely placed foot behind his ankle completed the takedown. He fell not with a crash, but with a controlled, ignominious collapse. He landed on his hands and knees, his arm twisted in a lock that brought a grunt of pain from his lips. Sarah held him there for exactly 1 second, her knee pressed firmly into his back, a demonstration of absolute terrifying efficiency. Then she released him and stepped back, her hands falling to her sides. The entire sequence had taken less than 2 seconds. It was not a brawl. It was surgery, a scalpel dissecting a hammer. Silence fell over the hangar bay, not the silence of shock, but something deeper. The silence of 1,000 people forgetting to breathe. They had just witnessed the impossible. An enlisted sailor with quiet and brutal grace had neutralized a flag officer. Sarah stood motionless, her expression unreadable. Two burly master-at-arms rushed the stage, their faces masks of confusion. They didn't know whether to arrest her or applaud her. She saved them the trouble. She calmly placed her hands behind her back, offering her wrists. She had followed one protocol, then broken another. Now she would follow the consequences. As they led her away, her eyes briefly met Ashford's in the crowd. Ashford's face was ghost white, her expression pure unadulterated awe. In the back of the hangar, Thomas Halstead stood frozen, his heart hammered in his chest. He had just witnessed something he thought he would never see again. That takedown, that specific sequence. Radial nerve strike, into joint lock, into controlled fall. Spetsnaz counter technique, Soviet special forces. He had learned it from a Russian defector during the Cold War. He had taught it to exactly 3 students, and he had just watched Sarah Merrick execute it with the precision of a master. He closed his eyes. Memory washed over him. Kosovo, the night someone had saved his convoy. The mysterious operative they called Reaper. The woman who had moved through enemy territory like a ghost. It was her. It had always been her. And now she had just committed career suicide to protect her own dignity. Halstead pushed through the crowd, following the path they had taken toward the brig. He needed to understand what was happening. Why Fleet Command had pulled her back. What mission could possibly require Reaper's resurrection? Because logistics specialists didn't move like that, didn't think like that, didn't react with reflexes honed to kill. Sarah Merrick was no wrench turner. She was something the Navy had tried to bury, something dangerous and necessary. A weapon they had put away because it scared them, and someone had just decided to take her out of the arsenal. The question was why, and the answer Halstead suspected was going to shake this fleet to its foundation. The brig was a sterile box of gray steel and fluorescent light buried deep in the belly of the USS Dauntless, where the ship's hum became a low, constant vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Sarah Merrick sat on the edge of the narrow metal cot, her hands resting loosely on her knees, her breathing slow and controlled. She was not panicked. She was not angry. She was calculating. The variables were clear. Assault on a superior officer. Public humiliation of a flag admiral. Witnessed by 1,000 sailors. The court-martial would be swift. Dishonorable discharge. End of a career that officially existed only in redacted documents in classified databases. It was a logical, acceptable outcome. The alternative, allowing that loss of control to go unchallenged, was not discipline. Discipline was a two-way street. An officer who struck first had broken the compact. She had simply responded with the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat and protect herself. The Navy might not see it that way, but Sarah had stopped worrying about how institutions saw things a long time ago. She worried about what was true, what was right, what could be lived with when the lights went out and there was nothing left but conscience. She pulled off her right boot and extracted a small tool from a hidden compartment in the heel. A bypass key, modified Soviet design built by her own hands 15 years ago. She had carried it through a dozen operations across 4 continents, into places where discovery would have meant death. Now it was just a talisman, a reminder of who she had been. She began to disassemble it with practiced movements, separating components, checking tolerances, cleaning contact points. It was a ritual Thomas Halstead had taught her in 1997 when she was 19 years old and thought she understood what it meant to be a warrior. The memory came unbidden, sharp as broken glass. Camp Peary, Virginia, the farm, where the CIA trained its case officers and the military trained its ghosts. Summer heat so thick it felt like drowning. Sarah, on her 3rd day of advanced technical infiltration, failing for the 3rd time to crack a Soviet-era lock mechanism. Halstead had walked up behind her, 36 years old, then already a legend in certain circles. Marine Force reconnaissance, multiple combat deployments, recruited into naval special warfare for reasons that were never explained and didn't need to be. "You're fighting it," he had said, his voice calm, almost gentle. You think you need to force your way through, but locks are like people. They respond better to understanding than to violence. He had taken the tool from her hands and demonstrated, not forcing, listening, feeling, understanding the mechanism's language. In the field, he continued, you won't have time to think. You need to know this in your bones, in your muscles, so that when fear makes your mind slow, your hands remember. She had practiced for 6 more hours, until her fingers bled, until the movements became automatic, until she could open Soviet locks blindfolded in under 10 seconds. That lesson had saved her life in Kosovo, and again in Syria, and in a dozen other places that existed only in classified after-action reports written in language so vague it could mean anything or nothing. Now, 28 years later, she performed the same ritual. Disassemble, clean, reassemble. Let the chaos of the world resolve into the predictable logic of mechanical systems. Let the hands remember what the mind wanted to forget. Above her, the ship hummed with a new tension. The incident in the hangar bay had sent a shockwave through the crew. In the officers' mess, in the enlisted berthing areas, in every corner where sailors gathered, the story was being told and retold. Each iteration adding details, building mythology. Master Chief Merrick had dropped a flag admiral in 2 seconds. Master Chief Merrick moved like someone who had done it before. Master Chief Merrick had never even changed expression. Who the hell was Master Chief Merrick? In his quarters, Fleet Admiral James Blackwood sat alone. The door locked, the lights dimmed. His right arm throbbed where Sarah's nerve strike had landed. Medical had checked him out. No permanent damage. Just bruised pride and a lesson in humility that tasted like bile. A photograph sat on his desk. His son, Lieutenant James Blackwood Jr., in dress whites, smiling the way young men smile when they think they're immortal. The photo was 8 years old, taken 3 months before the USS Porter incident. Blackwood picked up the frame with his left hand, his right still partially numb. He stared at his son's face and felt the familiar weight of grief settle on his chest like an anchor. James Jr. had been a good officer. Smart, adaptable, eager to prove himself. He had believed in the new technology, the integrated systems, the promise that computers could make warfare cleaner and more precise. And then a software glitch had turned the Porter's fire control system into a fratricide machine. 12 sailors dead, including the Admiral's son, killed by friendly fire from their own defensive systems. An investigation, a classified report. Conclusions about inadequate testing and rushed deployment. Recommendations for improved protocols. But no one brought back. No amount of improved protocols returned a son to his father. Blackwood had blamed the technology. It was easier than blaming himself for encouraging James to pursue naval service. Easier than blaming the Navy for rushing systems into deployment. Easier than accepting that sometimes there was no one to blame, just chaos and cruel chance. So he had gone to war against the machines, against the fragile digital systems that had killed his boy. He had become a champion of the old ways, the proven ways, the human ways. And today, one of those fragile human ways, his own loss of control, had put him on his knees in front of his entire command. A knock at the door, firm, official. Enter. Captain Margaret Duval stepped inside, closing the door behind her. 51 years old commander of the USS Dauntless, with 28 years of service and a reputation for speaking truth even when it was unwelcome. Admiral, we need to discuss what happened. Blackwood set the photo down. I struck an enlisted sailor. She defended herself. It's very simple, Captain. Convene the court-martial. It's not that simple, sir. Duval remained standing, her posture respectful but firm. Master Chief Merrick showed remarkable restraint. She could have seriously injured you. Instead, she used a controlled technique to neutralize the threat and then immediately submitted to arrest. Are you defending her? I'm stating facts, sir. A civilian attorney would have a field day with this. You initiated physical contact. She responded with proportional force, and witnesses will testify that you were the aggressor. Blackwood's jaw tightened. So I'm the villain in this story. No, sir. You're a man who made a mistake. And she's a woman who protected herself. But there's something else you need to know. Duval pulled a tablet from her jacket and placed it on the desk. Master Chief Merrick's service record. The parts that aren't classified. Blackwood glanced at the screen. It was mostly blank, blocks of text redacted, Entire years missing. A presidential unit citation with no details. Commendations with no descriptions. What am I looking at, Captain? A ghost, sir. Someone who spent 2 decades doing things the Navy won't acknowledge. Someone Fleet Command requested by name for this operation. Someone who was supposed to fix our network quietly and then disappear. And instead I gave her a stage. Yes, sir, you did. Blackwood studied the redacted record, a cold realization settling in his gut. He had assumed she was a technician, a specialist, someone who fixed things but didn't understand the warrior's way. He had been catastrophically wrong. What do you recommend, Captain? Duvall met his eyes. I recommend you figure out who she really is, because we're about to need her more than you know. 2 decks above the brig in the Combat Information Center, Lieutenant Kimberly Ashford and Petty Officer Garrett Thorne were discovering the same thing. Ashford had used her temporary command override granted during the Admiral's incapacitation to access Sarah's full service record. What she found made her blood run cold. This can't be right, she whispered, staring at the screen. Thorne leaned over her shoulder. His face went pale. That's impossible. The Presidential Unit Citation from 2000. The text was heavily redacted, but fragments remained visible. Solo operative, Serbian command and control, prevented ethnic cleansing. No name listed, only a call sign. Reaper. The Reaper is a myth, Thorne said, but his voice lacked conviction. They're campfire stories. Legends that tech guys tell to scare each other. The ghost who could move between physical and digital worlds, who disabled a rogue nation's air defenses by breaking into the command bunker with a device the size of a credit card. Myths don't have presidential unit citations. Ashford scrolled further. More redactions, more fragments. Kosovo, Syria, Yemen, Azerbaijan. A career spent in shadows hunting enemies the American public would never know existed. She's real, Ashford breathed. Reaper is real, and we just watched her get arrested. Thorne was already pulling up his own research, cross-referencing legends with timeline with the fragments of Sarah's record. If the stories are true, if even half of them are true, she's one of the most dangerous people in the Navy. Tier 1 operator, ghost program. The kind of asset you use when everything else has failed. Then why is she here? Why send someone like that to fix a network problem? They looked at each other, the same realization dawning. Unless it's not just a network problem, Thorne said slowly. He pulled up the diagnostic codes Sarah had been writing, the monitoring subroutines, the forensic traps. Look at this. This isn't standard debugging. She's hunting something. Ashford traced the code logic, her training from the Naval Academy clicking into place. She found something, a signature in the firmware, and she didn't tell anyone because if you're hunting ghosts, you don't turn on the lights. They stared at the code, at the elegant traps Sarah had built into the system. Waiting, watching, gathering evidence of something they couldn't yet see. We need to keep this running, Ashford said. Whatever she found, whatever she's hunting, we can't let it know we're looking. Agreed, but Lieutenant, Thorne's face was grim. If there's hostile code in our system, if someone compromised the firmware update, then we're already at war. We just don't know it yet. At 1400 hours, Operation Neptune Spear officially commenced. 5 carrier groups maneuvered into formation, their powerful engines churning the Pacific into white froth. 73 ships moving in coordinated ballet, a demonstration of power and precision. On the bridge of the dauntless Admiral Blackwood issued his orders. His face was set in stone, his voice carrying absolute certainty. All ships, this is Dauntless, actual. Effective immediately, all advanced integrated network systems are to be placed in passive monitoring mode. Primary operations will default to standalone backup systems. We will run this exercise the way we ran Desert Storm, with human judgment and proven technology. Captain Duvall opened her mouth to object, then closed it. The order was legal, foolish but legal. At the rear of the bridge, Senior Chief Thomas Halstead felt ice form in his stomach. He had supported the Admiral's philosophy, had nodded along when Blackwood talked about the fragility of modern systems, had agreed that the Navy relied too much on computers. But this was different. This was deliberately blinding the fleet before a major operation. The backup systems were old, sluggish, full of security vulnerabilities. They lacked the redundancy and fail-safes of the modern network. "Sir," Halstead said quietly, approaching the command chair. "Request permission to speak freely." Blackwood turned. "Granted, Senior Chief." "Admiral, the backup systems weren't designed for fleet-level coordination. They're adequate for individual ship operations, but linking 73 vessels through standalone networks. Sir, we're creating vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities we know how to manage, Senior Chief. Better that than relying on systems we don't understand. Systems that fail when we need them most." Halstead wanted to argue, wanted to point out that modern systems existed precisely because the old ones had proven inadequate. That Desert Storm was 34 years ago and the world had changed. But he was a senior chief. Blackwood was a flag admiral. The chain of command was absolute. "Aye, aye, sir." He returned to his station, but the unease gnawed at him. Something was wrong. He could feel it the way old sailors feel coming storms. A pressure in the air, a wrongness in the world. For the first 3 hours, everything proceeded smoothly. The fleet moved through its exercises, practicing formations and maneuvers. The standalone systems were slow, clunky, but functional. Navigation officers dusted off old sextant skills. Communication relied on line-of-sight radio. Fire control was manual. It felt archaic, but it worked. Blackwood stood on the bridge, a small smile of satisfaction on his face. See, the old ways were sufficient. The old ways were reliable. The technology was unnecessary, a crutch for a generation that had forgotten how to think. At 1645 hours, the sky began to change. It started as a subtle shift in color, the blue deepening toward green, taking on a sickly, phosphorescent quality. The kind of color that exists in deep ocean trenches or in the light of certain chemical reactions or in nightmares. On the Dauntless's bridge, a junior officer monitoring the long-range sensor array, one of the few modern systems still active in passive mode, suddenly straightened. "Captain, I'm seeing unusual solar activity, increased X-ray flux, elevated particle density." Duval moved to the sensor station. "Elaborate." "Ma'am, NORAD space weather forecast predicted a minor solar flare, but this is reading as a Carrington-class coronal mass ejection." Halstead was at the station in 2 strides. He had been Navy long enough to know that name. Carrington event, 1859. A solar storm so powerful it set telegraph wires on fire and caused auroras visible at the equator. The largest geomagnetic storm in recorded history. If that happened now with modern electronics. "Get NORAD on the line, confirm that reading." The communication officer worked his console. Static, interference, then a voice garbled and panicked. "All stations, this is NORAD space weather. Carrington-class CME confirmed. Unprecedented magnitude. Direct impact to Pacific Theater. ETA 60 seconds. Repeat 60 seconds to impact. All vessels initiate." The transmission cut off in a burst of static that sounded like the world tearing. "All hands brace for electromagnetic pulse." Duval's voice cut through the sudden chaos. "Secure all sensitive equipment, emergency protocols." But there was no time. No time to do anything but watch the green sky intensify to a color that hurt to look at. No time to react before the wave hit. The lights didn't flicker. They died. Every light on the USS Dauntless, every screen, every display, every glowing indicator died in an instant. The constant reassuring hum of the ship's electrical systems, the sound so omnipresent it became background vanished. For one terrible moment, there was absolute silence and absolute darkness. Then the emergency batteries kicked in, flooding the bridge in blood-red emergency lighting that turned every face into a devil's mask. And then the screaming started. Not from the bridge, but from throughout the ship. Damage reports flooding in through backup communication. Primary power offline. Navigation offline. Communication offline. Life support offline. Propulsion offline. The backup systems, the reliable old systems that Blackwood had championed, had been fried instantly. Their older wiring, their insufficient shielding, their lack of modern protection made them perfectly vulnerable to electromagnetic pulse. The advanced integrated systems the fragile modern technology had triggered automatic isolation protocols the moment they detected the incoming radiation. Physical disconnects had severed them from the power grid, protecting their sensitive components. The irony was brutal. "Helm status." Duval's voice cut through the chaos. Helm is unresponsive. Captain, no power to steering. Engineering, restore propulsion. Negative, Captain, primary reactor is scrammed. Backup generators are down. We're running on battery reserves only. Estimate 40 minutes to minimal power restoration if we can isolate the damage. 40 minutes. They didn't have 40 minutes. Halstead felt the ship's motion change. The subtle pull of current. The gentle but unstoppable push of the storm that had been building on the horizon. And he knew with the certainty of 43 years at sea exactly where that current led. Captain, we're drifting. Storm surge is pushing us north-northwest. At current speed and heading, he didn't need to finish. Everyone on the bridge knew the waters, knew the charts, dragon's teeth, a series of volcanic reefs that had claimed ships for centuries. Jagged rocks lurking just below the surface, invisible until they tore the hull from a vessel. They had 20 minutes, maybe less. All hands damage control teams to stations. I want a full report on power systems in 5 minutes. Duval was running toward the door, toward the engineering spaces, toward the heart of the ship, where the real battle would be fought. Blackwood sat frozen in the command chair, his face ashen. His worst nightmare had come true, but worse than he had imagined. His solution, his old reliable ways, had failed catastrophically, and now his ship, his fleet, was drifting toward destruction. Deep in the brig, Sarah felt the power die, felt the shift in the ship's motion as it lost propulsion, heard the distant chaos of a crew facing catastrophe. She stood, walked to the cell door and listened. Solar flare. Had to be. Nothing else could cause simultaneous failure across multiple redundant systems. The question was magnitude. If it was minor, they would recover quickly. If it was Carrington class, they were looking at catastrophic EMP damage. The ship's motion told her the answer. They were drifting, powerless, which meant the backup systems had failed, which meant the modern systems, the ones she had been debugging, were their only hope. If they had survived the pulse. If the firmware bug that had taken them offline had actually saved them by triggering a physical disconnect before the EMP hit. If, maybe, possibly. Sarah sat back down on the cot. She had done the calculations. She knew what was coming. She could feel it in the ship's motion, in the angle of the deck, in the frequency of the vibrations coming through the hull. They were going to hit the reefs. And when they did, a lot of people were going to die. She waited, patient, calm, ready. Her time was coming. Lieutenant Kimberly Ashford ran through the red-lit corridors of the USS Dauntless with her heart in her throat and a decision crystallizing in her mind. The kind of decision that either makes a career or ends it. Around her, the ship was dying. Sailors rushed past carrying equipment, shouting damage reports, trying to organize in the absence of internal communications. The chaos was profound. She found the brig on Deck 5 forward section. The master-at-arms on duty was Chief Warrant Officer Gunner, a mountain of a man with 30 years of service and a face like weathered oak. Lieutenant Ashford, Gunner's surprise was evident. "What are you doing here?" "I need you to release Master Chief Merrick, now." Gunner's expression hardened. "On whose authority, Lieutenant, she's under arrest for striking a superior officer. Only the captain or the admiral can authorize release." This was it, the moment. The choice that would define everything that came after. Ashford straightened, pulled every ounce of academy training into her voice. "On my authority, Captain Duval is incapacitated coordinating damage control and engineering. Admiral Blackwood has delegated emergency operational authority to me as senior officer present for this crisis." It was a lie, a complete fabrication. But it was delivered with such conviction, such absolute certainty, that for a moment even Ashford believed it. Gunner stared at her, his eyes narrowed. He was no fool. He could smell a career-ending decision from a mile away. But he had also witnessed the takedown in the hangar bay, had seen Master Chief Merrick's control, her precision, her restraint, had seen a woman who could have broken the Admiral's arm but chose only to demonstrate dominance. That spoke to something deeper than rank, something more fundamental than regulations. "This better be the right call, Lieutenant." He pulled his key card and swiped it through the lock. The cell door hissed open. Sarah stood just inside as if she had been expecting them. Her gray eyes met Ashford's, questioning but not surprised. "Solar flare EMP," Ashford said, dispensing with preamble. "Primary power is gone. Backup systems are fried. We're drifting toward Dragon's Teeth. Captain estimates 20 minutes to impact. Can you help us? Sarah picked up her diagnostic case, which they had allowed her to keep, tools being no threat in a locked cell. The hardened systems I was debugging. The firmware bug triggered a physical disconnect when it detected the incoming pulse. Basic self-preservation subroutine. Ironically, the Admiral's order to shut them down helped. They weren't drawing power when the EMP hit. Can you restore them? Perhaps, if the core processors survived, if I can bypass the safety interlocks, if we can generate enough power from an isolated source. Sarah was already moving and walking out of the cell with the confidence of someone taking command. Take me to the primary systems integration hub. Deck 4 aft section. Move fast. They ran. Ashford and Sarah, with Gunner following through corridors, lit only by emergency lights, through chaos and fear, toward a room that didn't appear on any public blueprint of the ship. Petty Officer Garrett Thorne appeared from a side corridor, carrying Sarah's larger equipment case. Lieutenant, I grabbed this from the CIC, thought she might need it. Good thinking, Thorne. Stay with us. Sarah's workshop was an oasis of order in the storm. Tools neatly arranged on shadow boards. Schematics filed and labeled. Equipment secured against the ship's motion. In the center of the room, a heavily shielded access panel. Sarah keyed in a code from memory. A steel plate slid aside, revealing a complex web of fiber optic cables and thick insulated conduits. The arterial system of the ship's most critical functions. This is the secondary isolated power grid, Sarah explained, already pulling on heavily insulated gloves. Designed to power strategic weapon systems even if the rest of the ship is a dead hulk. We can use it to bootstrap the main network. How? Thorne was staring at the conduits like they were alien technology. Force sequential reboot with a manual bypass loop. We're going to channel the entire output of the secondary reactor into the primary grid, bypassing every safety feature and protocol. It's incredibly dangerous. Feedback loop could melt half the wiring in the ship. What are our chances? Ashford asked. Sarah looked at her with those calm gray eyes. Better than our chances of surviving the reefs. Thorne, I need you to create a bypass loop on the main network server. Use this. She handed him a custom data tap from her case. It will fool the authentication protocols into thinking this is a diagnostic routine. Lieutenant, you and 2 others need to get to the emergency power distribution junctions on decks 3, 5, and 7. She was issuing orders now naturally, as if rank had ceased to matter, as if competence was the only authority that counted. Each junction has 3 large copper breakers labeled Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. When I give the word, you engage them in exact sequence. Alpha, then wait 3 seconds, then Bravo, then wait 3 seconds, then Charlie. Any other order, any other timing, you create a feedback loop that will catastrophically fail. Do you understand? Oh, in 3 seconds. Exact sequence. Ashford was already moving, grabbing 2 junior officers from the corridor. The ship groaned, a terrible shrieking sound of metal under stress. The first of the Dragon's Teeth had found them. A glancing blow, but enough to send everyone stumbling. No time left, Sarah said quietly. Go now. As Ashford and her team disappeared into the red-lit corridors, Sarah turned to the exposed conduits. 2 thick cables, their ends crackling with barely contained energy. Touching these without proper procedure would kill her instantly. Thorne, is the bypass loop active? Working on it, his fingers flew across the holographic interface, writing code at inhuman speed. Another impact, harder this time. The deck tilted violently. Tool clattered to the floor, somewhere below the sound of tearing metal. They were scraping along the reef now, minutes until a rock found something vital, until the hull breached and the ocean poured in. Loop is active, Thorne shouted. System thinks it's running diagnostics. Sarah keyed her comm unit, hoping the short-range radio had survived. Lieutenant Ashford, stand by on Alpha. Static. Then Ashford's voice breathless. Standing by. Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment. This was why Fleet Command had pulled her out of logistics. Not for her technical knowledge alone, Schwab, but because when everything failed, when all the safe options were gone, they needed someone crazy enough to try the impossible. Someone who had walked into Serbian bunkers and Syrian command centers and a dozen other places where death waited. someone who understood that sometimes survival required dancing on the edge of catastrophe. "Mark, engage Alpha, now!" She slammed the first cable into its port. The surge of power threw her back a step. The cable bucked in her hands like a living thing. Every light in the workshop flared to impossible brightness. A high-pitched whine filled the air, the sound of capacitors screaming as they were forced to accept a charge they were never designed for. Sarah counted in her head. 1, 2, 3. Engage, Bravo. The whine intensified, rising in pitch until it became physical pain. Sarah's hands burned even through the insulated gloves, but she held on, held the cable steady, kept the connection solid. 1, 2, 3. Engage, Charlie, now. She jammed the second cable home. For one horrifying second, nothing happened. The whine became unbearable, a shriek that seemed to come from the ship itself. The lights flickered, dimmed, and then died completely. Absolute blackness. Absolute silence. It didn't work. Thorne breathed, his voice hollow with defeat. "Wait," Sarah said. And then, like a heartbeat returning after cardiac arrest, a hum, low, subliminal at first, building in strength. The main lights flickered. Once, twice. Then steady, clean, white light flooded the workshop. The ventilation systems kicked in with a roar, circulating fresh air. On Thorne's monitor, ship systems began flashing from red to green, one by one, like dominoes falling in reverse. Navigation, communication, propulsion. On the bridge, the main view screen blazed to life, showing a terrifyingly close view of jagged, volcanic rock off the starboard bow. So close, they could see barnacles on the stone. "Helm is responding," someone shouted, their voice cracking with relief and disbelief. Captain Duvall, who had sprinted back to the bridge when emergency power returned, didn't hesitate. Propulsion online, the all-hull engines ahead, full hard to port. The massive turbines, silent for 27 minutes, spun to life. The ship shuddered as thrust fought against momentum and current. Slowly, agonizingly, the USS Dauntless began to turn. The stern swung around, clearing the final deadly rock by less than 20 feet. Scraping paint. Nothing more. They were free. They were alive. The bridge erupted in cheers and shouts, and the kind of laughter that comes after staring at death and watching it blink. Admiral Blackwood slumped in his command chair, his face the color of old snow. Senior Chief Halstead stood at his station, a quiet smile on his weathered face. She had done it. Reaper had done it again. Saved them all, just like Kosovo, just like all the times before that no one would ever know about. Down in the workshop, Sarah leaned against a bulkhead, the heavy cables dropping from her hands. For the first time, a trace of exhaustion showed on her face. Thorne was staring at her with something approaching religious awe. "How did you know that would work?" Sarah's voice was quiet, matter-of-fact. "I helped design this system, classified Project 2015. They asked me because I understand how Soviet engineers think, how to make reliable systems from unreliable parts, how to build in failure modes that actually protect instead of cascade." She began calmly packing her tools. The crisis was over. Her work was done. But both of them knew that something had fundamentally changed. Master Chief Sarah Merrick had just saved an entire fleet. The question of who she really was could no longer be avoided. The legend was no longer legend. Reaper had returned, and the Navy was about to remember why some ghosts should never be buried. The USS Dauntless became the eye of a different kind of storm in the hours that followed. Not electromagnetic fury from the sun, but human chaos rippling through a fleet that had just stared into the abyss and survived by the thinnest of margins. Across the Pacific theater, 73 ships struggled back to operational status. Some had suffered minimal damage, their modern systems protected by automatic isolation protocols. Others had been gutted, their backup systems destroyed, their crews working by flashlight and manual control. But none had been lost. No hulls breached beyond repair, no lives claimed by the sea, 0 casualties. A miracle wrapped in mathematics and one woman's understanding of how systems fail. The Dauntless, first to restore power, became the coordination hub. Captain Margaret Duvall ran the bridge with crisp efficiency, managing damage reports and resource allocation across the scattered fleet. But even as she worked, she felt the shift in the ship's atmosphere. The way conversations stopped when certain names were mentioned. The way sailors moved through passageways with a new awareness. Word traveled through a naval vessel faster than any communication system. It moved through whispers in the mess hall, through knowing glances in the corridors, through the sudden silence that fell when a particular person entered a room. Master Chief Merrick had dropped a flag admiral in 2 seconds. Master Chief Merrick had saved the fleet after the EMP. Master Chief Merrick was someone no one had ever really seen before. The story evolved with each telling. Details emerged. Petty Officer Garrett Thorne, unable to contain himself, had shared what he learned about the Presidential Unit citation, about the call sign, about the program that officially didn't exist. Reaper. The name spread like wildfire through the younger crew members who lived on their devices, who researched everything, who couldn't resist a mystery. They found the legends, the campfire stories that cybernetics techs told each other, the ghost operative who moved between physical and digital warfare, who had disabled enemy networks from inside their command centers, who appeared and disappeared like smoke. The older sailors, the ones with gray in their beards and ribbons from Kosovo and Afghanistan, grew quiet when they heard the stories. Some remembered whispers from their own deployments, operations that succeeded for reasons never explained, enemies who went blind at critical moments, intelligence that appeared from nowhere. They had always assumed it was luck, or classified assets they didn't need to know about. Now they wondered. Sarah Merrick remained in the Combat Information Center, working at a secondary console with the focused intensity that had become her signature. She was finalizing the network patch integrating permanent safeguards against the vulnerability she had discovered. The monitoring subroutines she had planted were still active, still gathering data, building a complete forensic picture of the intrusion. Lieutenant Kimberly Ashford approached cautiously, carrying 2 cups of coffee in insulated containers. She set one within Sarah's reach without speaking, then stood beside her watching the code scroll across multiple screens. "They're calling it the Merrick Cascade," Ashford said quietly. "The emergency reboot procedure. Fleet Command wants it written into doctrine for all ships. The official technical manual addendum will be published within the month." Sarah's fingers paused on the keyboard. She picked up the coffee, took a slow sip, felt the warmth spread through hands that still ached from holding live cables. "It's just a forced sequential reboot with a manual bypass loop. The theory is 100 years old. People forget the basics when the lights go out. The basics don't usually involve channeling a reactor's full output through systems designed for 1/10 that load. The systems can handle it, briefly, if you understand their tolerances. If you know where the actual limits are versus where the safety margins put the red lines." Sarah returned to her work, but something in her voice had softened slightly. The engineers who designed these systems were more conservative than they needed to be. They built in failure modes to protect expensive equipment. Sometimes you have to choose between protecting the hardware and saving the crew. Ashford absorbed this, filing it away with all the other lessons she was learning from watching Sarah work. "Lieutenant Chen asked me earlier. She wanted to know why you didn't tell anyone about the sabotage, the Russian code signature." "Chen," Sarah's voice carried a note of confusion. "I'm sorry, I meant myself. I asked myself why you didn't tell anyone." Ashford caught herself, realized she had confused her own thoughts with conversation. The stress and exhaustion were showing. "The question stands, though." Sarah was silent for a long moment, her eyes tracking data streams, her mind clearly working on multiple levels. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of long experience. "When you're hunting ghosts, Lieutenant, you don't turn on the lights. The moment you announce you've found them, they disappear. Change tactics. Cover their tracks. You need to watch them, learn their patterns. Build an airtight case before you strike." She pulled up a data file, highlighted several sections of code. This wasn't one rogue programmer. This is sophisticated, coordinated part of a larger operation. Russian GRU Cyber Warfare Division has been targeting fleet networks for at least 18 months, maybe longer. They're looking for weaknesses, mapping our systems, preparing for something bigger. "How do you know all this?" Sarah glanced at her, and for a brief moment, Ashford saw something in those gray eyes. Not just knowledge, but memory, the kind that left scars invisible to medical examinations. "Because I spent 20 years hunting people who think like this, in places where making a mistake meant not coming home. You learn to think 3 moves ahead. You learn to be patient. You learn that the right time to act is not when you first see the threat, but when you fully understand it. The confession hung in the air between them. Sarah had just acknowledged, not directly but unmistakably, that her career had been something far beyond logistics and technical support. The legends are true, aren't they? Ashford's voice was barely a whisper. About Reaper. Legends are always true, Lieutenant, and they're always false. The truth is usually more complicated and less dramatic than people want to believe. Sarah closed several windows on her screen, her work reaching a natural pause point. What matters is what happens next. The Russian infiltration is documented now. Pentagon Cyber Command has the evidence. They'll clean the networks, patch the vulnerabilities, update the security protocols. The immediate threat is contained. And you, what happens to you? I imagine Admiral Blackwood and I will have a conversation. Then there will be paperwork. Then I'll return to logistics. Sarah's voice carried no emotion, just pragmatic acceptance of likely outcomes. But Ashford had been watching Sarah long enough now to hear what wasn't said. The slight hesitation before logistics, the way her hands rested on the console, not quite ready to let go. This woman, whatever her official designation, was not meant for quiet work in the supply chains. She was a weapon, and weapons that are locked away too long forget their purpose. Across the ship, in a workshop that had become a site of pilgrimage for curious sailors, Senior Chief Thomas Halstead stood alone. He held a small device in his weathered hands, a modified Soviet bypass key that Sarah had left behind when the master-at-arms escorted her to the brig. He recognized it immediately. He had taught the modification himself back in 1997 to a handful of students selected for a program that existed in budget line items, but nowhere else. A program designed to create operators who could move between the physical and digital worlds with equal facility. The Navy had called it Phantom Protocol. The CIA had called it Overreach. In the end, after too many successful operations and too many uncomfortable questions about legality and oversight, they had shut it down, scattered the operators, buried the records, pretended it had never existed. But the weapons you create don't cease being weapons just because you stop acknowledging them. Halstead turned the device over in his hands, memories flooding back. Kosovo. His convoy pinned down, the mortars walking closer with each impact. The acceptance that this was where it ended, on a frozen road in the Balkans far from home. Then silence. The mortars stopping, the enemy radar going dark, and later the intelligence report. Someone had infiltrated the targeting facility, disabled it from the inside, left behind a modified bypass key as the only evidence of their presence. He had known in that moment who had saved them, but he had never asked, never confirmed. Some things were better left as instinct and gratitude. Now, holding this key, he understood that Sarah had been carrying it for 26 years, a piece of equipment from that mission, a reminder of who she had been, of who she still was underneath the logistics uniform in the quiet demeanor. The door to the workshop opened. Sarah stepped inside, saw Halstead holding the key, and stopped. For a long moment, neither spoke. Kosovo, Halstead finally said. His voice was rough with emotion. December 1999. You saved 8 Marines. My convoy. We were dead men, and then we weren't. You kept your men calm, Chief. You made good decisions under fire. You did everything right. Sarah's voice was gentle, almost tender. I just disabled some equipment. You were 21 years old. You infiltrated a Serbian command facility alone, disabled their targeting systems, extracted under fire. I found the after-action report years later buried in classified archives. They gave you a presidential unit citation for it. They gave Reaper a citation. I was just a specialist following orders. Don't. The word came out harder than Halstead intended. He took a breath, moderated his tone. Don't diminish what you did, what you've been doing. I trained you. I know what I put into you. But what you became, that was all you. You took the tools and built something I never imagined. Sarah stepped fully into the workshop, closing the door behind her. You taught me everything that mattered, Tom. How to stay calm when the world is chaos. How to think when fear is screaming. How to know when to act and when to wait. Those lessons saved my life 100 times. And now they've saved a fleet. Now they've prevented one disaster. There will be others. There always are. Halstead extended his hand, offering the bypass key. Sarah took it, their fingers touching briefly. The contact carried 28 years of unspoken understanding. Teacher and student, mentor and protege. Two warriors who had walked similar paths in different eras. I'm retiring next year, Halstead said. 44 years will be enough. I'm 64 years old. Time to let the next generation take over. You have a lot of fight left in you, Chief. Maybe, but I also have grandchildren I've never spent enough time with. A wife who's been patient for 4 decades. A life I've postponed too many times. He paused, studying her face. What about you? What comes next for Sarah Merrick? I imagine that depends on what Admiral Blackwood decides, and what Pentagon thinks about a Master Chief who assaulted a flag officer and then saved his fleet. They'll pin a medal on you and promote you. That's what they should do. Or they'll court-martial me and make an example. Discipline matters. Chain of command matters. I broke both. After he struck you first. That won't matter to everyone. And maybe it shouldn't. I could have deflected and retreated. I chose to put him on the ground in front of his command. That was ego. That was pride. It was, Sarah searched for the word, unnecessary. Halstead smiled, a rare expression that softened his weathered features. It was necessary, not for your safety, for his education. James Blackwood is a good officer and a good man. But he had forgotten something important. That rank doesn't make you right. That authority without wisdom is just tyranny with medals. He moved toward the door, then paused. You taught him that lesson. Sometimes the young have to teach the old, even when the young is 47 and the old is 62. After Halstead left, Sarah sat alone in the workshop for a long time. She disassembled the bypass key, completely laying out its components with ritualistic precision. Clean each piece. Check each tolerance. Reassemble with absolute care. The meditation that Halstead had taught her 3 decades ago. Her hands moved with automatic precision while her mind wandered through memories. Berlin, Kosovo, Syria, Yemen, Azerbaijan, a dozen other places where she had been Reaper, where she had moved through shadows and changed outcomes and disappeared before anyone knew she had been there. She had been good at it, better than good. She had been exceptional, and that was precisely why they had quietly asked her to stop. Excellence in asymmetric warfare made people uncomfortable, made politicians ask questions about oversight and legality, made allies nervous about what America's ghosts were doing in their countries. So they had thanked her for her service, classified everything, and suggested logistics would be a good fit for her skills. Systems management, supply chain coordination, important work certainly, necessary work, but work that didn't require walking into enemy strongholds with nothing but a bypass key and the absolute certainty that failure meant death. She had accepted it. 25 years in the field was enough for anyone. Her knees hurt. Her hands had scars. She carried injuries that would never fully heal and memories that would never fade. Logistics was supposed to be rest, retirement without actually retiring, a chance to serve without the constant edge of mortal danger. Except rest didn't suit her, and the quiet felt like suffocation. The bypass key clicked back together, perfectly restored. She held it in her palm, feeling its familiar weight, a piece of her history, a reminder that some skills once learned never truly rust. A knock at the door interrupted her reflection. Enter. Admiral James Blackwood stepped inside alone without the usual entourage of aides and officers that surrounded flag rank. He looked older than he had that morning, smaller somehow, as if the day's events had compressed him down to his essential self stripped of authority's armor. Sarah stood, came to attention. Old habits, old discipline. At ease, Master Chief. Blackwood's voice was quiet, lacking its usual command presence. I'm not here as your admiral. I'm here as the man who owes you his life and his fleet. Sir, I was simply doing my job. Your job was to fix a network connection. You saved 73 ships and 40,000 sailors from my catastrophically bad judgment. He moved into the workshop, his eyes scanning the organized tools, the precise arrangements. Captain Duvall briefed me on your service record, the unclassified parts anyway. Presidential unit citation, Kosovo, You prevented ethnic cleansing operations, saved thousands of civilians. The citation was for the mission, sir, not for me personally. It listed a call sign, Reaper. Blackwood turned to face her fully. The younger sailors have been researching, sharing stories. They say Reaper was a legend, a ghost operative who could disable entire command networks from the inside. They say Reaper was the person you sent when everything else had failed. Sarah met his eyes, her expression neutral. Sailors tell a lot of stories, Admiral, especially the young ones. Most of it is mythology built on fragments of truth. Is it mythology that you spent 20 years in classified operations? That fleet command pulled you out of logistics, specifically because they needed someone who understood Russian cyber warfare tactics? That you identified foreign sabotage in our systems and set traps to document it without alerting the adversary? That's tradecraft, sir. Anyone with proper training would have done the same. No, Blackwood's voice was firm. Not anyone. Someone with exceptional training, yes, and even more exceptional experience. Someone who has done this before, many times, in places the Navy won't acknowledge and under circumstances we can't discuss. He moved closer, his voice dropping. I struck you this morning, in front of 1,000 witnesses. I lost control. I let my grief about my son, my fear of technology, my pride override my judgment. You could have broken my arm. You could have seriously injured me. Instead, you demonstrated control. You neutralized the threat with minimum force and immediately submitted to arrest. He paused. That's not instinct, that's training. The kind of training that takes years to develop. The kind that only exists in programs that officially don't exist. Sarah held his gaze. What do you want to know, Admiral? The truth. Who are you really, Master Chief Merrick? She considered the question. Considered what could be said and what must remain in shadow. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of all the missions that would never be discussed. I'm a sailor, sir, like you, like every person on this ship. I took an oath to protect and defend. For 25 years, I did that in ways that required operating in shadows. I was good at it, good enough that it made people uncomfortable. So they asked me to stop, to transition to less controversial work. I accepted because I was tired and my body was breaking down and I had seen enough. But they pulled you back. They asked me to fix a technical problem. The rest was circumstance. The Admiral's challenge, the solar flare, just circumstance. Blackwood shook his head slowly. I don't believe in that much coincidence. Fleet Command knew what they were doing when they sent you. They knew about the Russian infiltration. They suspected sabotage. They needed someone who could identify it, document it, and fix it without starting an international incident. They needed Reaper. Reaper retired, sir. Reaper saved my fleet today. Silence stretched between them. The ship hummed around them, alive again. Systems restored, crisis past. But the moment felt suspended, separate from normal time. I owe you an apology, Blackwood finally said. And more than that, I owe you understanding. My son died because of a technology failure. I blamed the machines, blamed the modern systems, blamed everything except my own inability to adapt. He pulled out a data tablet, called up a file. This is my son's last letter home. He wrote it 3 weeks before he died. He turned the tablet towards Sarah. She read the highlighted passage. Dad, you need to understand that technology isn't the enemy. Inflexibility is. The world changes. Warfare changes. We have to change with it or we'll lose. Not to better equipment, but to our own obsolescence. The officers who refuse to adapt, who cling to the old ways because they're comfortable, they're the real danger, not the machines. Sarah read it twice, absorbing the words. Lieutenant James Blackwood, Jr. had been wise beyond his years, and his death had prevented his father from hearing that wisdom until it was too late. He was right, Blackwood said, his voice thick. And I was wrong. I nearly killed everyone on this fleet because I was fighting the wrong war. Fighting my grief instead of the actual threat. You showed me that, the hard way, the only way I was going to understand. What happens now, sir? Blackwood took the tablet back, his shoulders straightening slightly. Now I recommend you for the Defense Distinguished Service Medal. I write a report explaining that you were acting in self-defense against my inappropriate conduct. I request that all charges be dropped and that you receive a formal commendation for saving this fleet under impossible circumstances. Sir, that's not necessary. It's completely necessary, Master Chief, for the record, for the truth, for my own conscience. He moved toward the door, then paused. Pentagon is going to want to talk to you about the Russian infiltration, about broader fleet security. They're going to offer you a position, probably a direct commission to officer ranks, cyber warfare directorate, or something similar. I'm not interested in that kind of work anymore, Admiral. I suspected as much, but you should know, the Navy needs people like you, people who understand both the old ways and the new, who can bridge the gap between my generation and Lieutenant Ashford's, between Chief Halstead's experience and Petty Officer Thorne's technical knowledge. He opened the door, letting in the corridor's light and sound. Whatever you decide, Master Chief, you've earned the right to choose your own path. Not many sailors can say that, but you've earned it. After he left, Sarah sat alone again with her thoughts and her memories in the bypass key that represented everything she had been. The question Blackwood raised echoed in her mind. What came next? What did Sarah Merrick want from the years she had remaining? The answer wasn't simple. It never was. 3 days later, after the fleet had stabilized and damage assessments were complete and the initial crisis had faded into reconstruction, Sarah stood on the observation deck in the pre-dawn darkness. The highest external platform on the Dauntless, exposed to wind and salt spray, usually deserted except for sailors who needed solitude. She had her diagnostic kit open on a small table illuminated by a single service light. The primary interface tool was completely disassembled, its intricate components laid out in precise order. She cleaned each piece with ritualistic care, checking tolerances, testing connections, reassembling with the attention of a watchmaker. This was her meditation, the place where chaos resolved into order, where the unpredictable world became logical systems that could be understood and fixed. Footsteps on the deck behind her. She didn't turn, didn't react, just continued her work. Coffee, Lieutenant Ashford's voice. The young officer had been seeking Sarah out more frequently, asking questions, watching how she approached problems. Mentorship without asking for it. Learning without formal instruction. Thank you. Ashford set the insulated cup within reach and stood beside her, watching the methodical disassembly and cleaning. They didn't speak for several minutes, just existed in comfortable silence, while Sarah worked and dawn approached on the eastern horizon. They're calling it the Merrick Cascade in the technical manuals, Ashford finally said. Emergency power restoration protocol. Required training for all engineering crews within the month. You're going to be famous, in a technical, manual kind of way. Sarah's hands paused. She picked up the coffee, felt its warmth, took a slow sip. A small smile touched the corners of her mouth, the first time Ashford had ever seen her smile. It's just a forced sequential reboot with a bypass loop, Sarah said, her voice carrying a hint of dry humor. The theory is 100 years old. People just forget the basics when the fancy lights go out. The basics don't usually save fleets from solar storms. The basics are usually what saves everything when the complex systems fail. That's why they're basics. She finished her coffee and returned to her work, the final pieces of the tool clicking together with satisfying precision. What are you really asking, Lieutenant? Ashford was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. I'm asking what happens to someone like you. Someone with your skills, your experience, your history. Do you just go back to logistics, file reports on supply chain efficiency, coordinate parts orders? That's the job. But is it your calling? The question hung in the salt air between them. Sarah held the reassembled tool in her hand, testing its weight, its balance. Perfect. Exactly as it should be. She placed it carefully in its foam-lined slot and closed the case. 25 years ago, Sarah said slowly, I believed my calling was to be a weapon, sharp, precise, deployed against enemies of the Republic. I was good at it, better than good. I was exceptional, and that exceptionalism made people uncomfortable, made politicians nervous, made allies question what America was doing in the shadows. She turned to face Ashford fully, her gray eyes reflecting the first hints of dawn. So they thanked me, classified my records, and suggested a quieter life. I accepted because I was tired, because my body was breaking down, because I had seen enough death and caused enough death, and the line between warrior and killer had become too thin. She paused. But quieter doesn't mean peaceful, and rest doesn't suit everyone. Some people are built for the edge, built to operate where everything matters and mistakes are fatal. Taking them off the edge doesn't change what they are. It just makes them dormant. And now Pentagon wants me for cyber warfare. Admiral Blackwood wants me for fleet security. Chief Halstead wants me to train the next generation. Sarah looked out at the horizon where orange and pink were painting the line between sea and sky. Everyone wants me to be something. What do you want? Before Sarah could answer, another set of footsteps crossed the deck. Heavier, older. Senior Chief Thomas Halstead approached carrying his own cup of coffee, moving with the careful precision of a man whose joints protested the early hour. Thought I'd find you here, he said to Sarah. Then to Ashford, Lieutenant, you mind if an old chief joins you? Not at all, Senior Chief. The three of them stood together watching the sunrise. 3 generations. Ashford at 28, just beginning to understand the weight of command. Sarah at 47, caught between what she had been and what she might become. Halstead at 64, approaching the end of his service, thinking about legacy. I got a message yesterday, Halstead said quietly, from an old friend at the Pentagon. They're putting together a team. Special Projects Division. Cyber warfare integrated with traditional intelligence operations. They need experienced operators, people who understand both worlds. And they want Reaper, Sarah said. Not a question. They want you, whatever you choose to call yourself. Halstead turned to look at her. They asked if I'd come out of retirement. One more mission. Help set up the training protocols. Pass on what I know before it disappears with my generation. Sarah met his eyes. You told them no. I told them I'd think about it. Talk to you first. See what you wanted. What I want doesn't matter. I'll do what the Navy needs. Bullshit. The word came out harder than Halstead intended, but he didn't soften it. You've done what the Navy needed for 28 years, bled for it, sacrificed for it, put yourself in harm's way more times than anyone should have to. You've earned the right to choose. So I'm asking again, what do you want? The question crystallized something Sarah had been feeling but not articulating, a restlessness, a sense that logistics, for all its importance, wasn't where she belonged, that the quiet life, while restful, was also suffocating, that some people were built for the edge and taking them off the edge didn't change what they were. It just made them dormant, and dormant weapons eventually rust. I want, Sarah said slowly, carefully speaking truth she had been avoiding, to matter, to use the skills I spent a lifetime developing, to face problems that don't have easy answers and find solutions anyway, to operate where it counts, where the stakes are real, where the difference between success and failure is measured in lives saved or lost. She looked at both of them, at Ashford, who represented the future, at Halstead, who represented the past, and she understood that she represented the bridge between them. I want one more mission, she said finally. Maybe more than one, however many it takes to train the next generation properly, to make sure the skills don't die with us, to ensure that when the next crisis comes, when the next impossible situation requires someone to walk into the fire, there are people ready who understand what that means. Halstead's weathered face broke into a genuine smile. That's the answer I was hoping for. The mission is real then. Chinese cyber warfare, working with Russian GRU, they're coordinating attacks on Pacific Fleet networks, probing defenses, mapping systems. The firmware infiltration you found? That's just one piece. There's a larger operation. Pentagon needs people who can identify it, document it, and stop it. People who understand Cold War tradecraft, updated for digital warfare. How long? 6 months to a year. Depends on what we find. Could be longer if it's as extensive as intelligence suggests. Sarah nodded slowly. The decision was made. Had probably been made the moment they pulled her out of logistics and put her on the Dauntless. Some things were inevitable. Some paths once started led to their natural conclusions regardless of detours. I'm in on one condition. Name it. Lieutenant Ashford comes with us. She needs to learn this. The next generation needs to understand both worlds, technology and tradecraft, new systems and old wisdom. She's smart, she's adaptable. She made hard decisions under pressure. That's the foundation. The rest we can teach. Ashford's eyes went wide. Master Chief, I'm just a junior officer. I don't have the experience. You made the call to release me from the brig, Sarah interrupted. You lied to a chief warrant officer. You took personal responsibility for a decision that could have ended your career. You did it because you knew it was right regardless of consequences. That's not something that can be taught. That's character. Everything else is just training. Halstead studied Ashford for a long moment, his experienced eyes assessing. Then he nodded. She's right. You've got the foundation. Question is, are you willing to learn? Because this won't be the academy training. This will be hard, dangerous. You'll see things that can't be unseen, do things that can't be discussed. And at the end, if you succeed, no one will know. No medals, no recognition, just the knowledge that you made a difference. Ashford looked between them, at Sarah, who had been where she was going, at Halstead, who had trained the best, at the sunrise painting the Pacific in colors that seemed too beautiful for a world with so much darkness. When do we start? She asked. The encrypted message arrived on Sarah's personal device 3 hours later. Nosebleed clearance, asset reactivation authorized. Report Camp Perry, Virginia, within 72 hours. Recommended additional assets, SCPO Thomas Halstead, LT Kimberly Ashford. The operation had a name. Operation Ghost Protocol. The mission parameters were classified at the highest levels, but the core was clear. Identify and neutralize Chinese-Russian cyber warfare coordination targeting Pacific Fleet. Protect American naval superiority in the digital age. Do it quietly, do it completely, do it with no official acknowledgement or support. The kind of mission Reaper had been built for. Sarah stood on the observation deck that final evening before the Dauntless returned to port. The fleet spread out behind them, damaged but intact, sailing in formation toward Pearl Harbor. 40,000 sailors who would never know how close they had come to disaster, who would never know that one woman's expertise in another man's training and a young officer's courage had been the margin between survival and catastrophe. That was fine. That was how it should be. The best operations were the ones no one ever knew about. Seaman First Class Elijah Brennan approached on crutches, his legs still healing from the engine room collapse. 19 years old, 3 generations of military service in his family. He had asked to speak with Sarah before they reached port. Master Chief Merrick, he said, attempting a salute that was awkward with the crutches. I just wanted to say thank you for saving my life, for saving all of us. Sarah looked at the young sailor and saw echoes of herself 28 years ago. Eager, frightened, trying to understand what it meant to serve, what it meant to be part of something larger than yourself. You stayed at your post, Seaman Brennan. You did your duty under impossible circumstances. That's all anyone can ask. That's all that matters. I hope someday I can be like you, Master Chief. You already are. You did what needed to be done when it needed doing. The rest is just experience, just time, just learning from people who've walked the path before you. She paused, then added, your grandfather served in Gulf War, your father in Afghanistan, now you. 3 generations of warriors. That legacy matters. That tradition matters. Honor it by being the best sailor you can be. Brennan nodded, emotion thick in his throat. He hobbled away and Sarah was alone again, with the sunset and her thoughts and the future that was unfolding. Senior Chief Halstead appeared one final time, standing beside her in companionable silence as the sun touched the horizon. Camp Peary in 3 days, he said. Back to where it all started for you. Full circle. Some circles don't close, Tom. They spiral. Each rotation passing through familiar territory but at a different level, higher or lower. Never quite the same place twice. Philosopher now. Just an old operator thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind, about whether the things we did in shadow mattered in the light. They mattered, every mission, every risk, every time you walked into the dark so others could stay in the light. It all mattered. Halstead's voice was firm, final. The judgment of a man who had spent 43 years serving and understood the weight of that service. You believe that, I know it, and so do you. You wouldn't be going back otherwise. They watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in violent reds and deep purples. The kind of sunset that seems to promise both ending and beginning, death and rebirth, the perpetual cycle of service and sacrifice that had defined their lives. One more mission, Sarah said quietly, for both of us. One more mission, Halstead agreed, but I suspect it won't be the last. People like us, we don't retire, we just take longer breaks between deployments. Sarah smiled. It was true. She had tried retirement or something like it, had spent years in logistics thinking the quiet would satisfy her. But some people were built for the edge, built to operate where everything mattered. Taking them off the edge didn't change what they were. It just made them dormant. And dormant weapons given time and necessity always returned to service. The USS Dauntless sailed into Pearl Harbor 3 days later. The fleet dispersed to various ports for repairs and refit. Official reports were filed. After-action reviews were conducted. The solar flare incident was classified at the highest levels. The details of the near disaster carefully managed to avoid public panic. Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Merrick, Logistics Specialist, received a Defense Distinguished Service Medal in a closed ceremony attended only by flag officers with appropriate clearances. The citation was classified, the details redacted. Just another line in a service record that was mostly blank. 2 days later, Sarah Merrick, Kimberly Ashford, and Thomas Halstead boarded a military transport to Virginia, to Camp Peary, to the farm where ghosts were trained and legends were born, to Operation Ghost Protocol and whatever waited in the shadows beyond. The war they were going to fight would never be acknowledged. The victories would never be celebrated. The sacrifices would never be recognized. But it would matter, every bit as much as any conventional war. Perhaps more because it would be fought in the spaces between official conflicts. In the digital shadows where nations tested each other's defenses, where the next Pearl Harbor might come not from the sky, but through fiber optic cables and satellite links. Sarah Merrick had been Reaper once. Then she had been a logistics specialist trying to rest. Now she was something new. Something that combined all she had been with all she had learned. She was the bridge between generations. The keeper of skills that couldn't be allowed to die. The teacher who would ensure that when the next impossible crisis came, there would be people ready who understood what it meant to walk into the fire. She was a warrior, had always been a warrior, would always be a warrior, and the work was never finished. As the transport lifted off, Sarah looked out the window at the Pacific stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there in the vast digital networks that connected continents and fleets and nations, an adversary was probing, testing, looking for weaknesses. They would find her instead, and they would learn, as so many had learned before them, that some ghosts never truly rest. Reaper was back, and the hunt had just begun.